In January 1993, Star Trek Deep Space Nine premiered and introduced us to the best cast of characters in Trek. Captain Benjamin Sisko, the space dad who gets space mad, Major Kira Nerys, the best character, and Quark, the other best character.
Hello?
Young Star Trek fans in the 90s also related to Odo, the outsider. Star Trek always had an outsider character that was appealing to viewers of these eras of Star Trek because being a geek who watched Star Trek was itself a mark of being an outsider. Nowadays, the culture has changed to the point that being a geek is dominant, and perhaps because of this, the outsider character on Deep Space Nine isn't as sacrosanct and has had something of a critical reevaluation, at least in some circles. Let's find out why. Odo is a changeling, a shapeshifter whose natural state is a liquid, a goo. He was sent by other changelings, without any memory, into space to learn more and eventually report back. Odo was recovered by Bajoran scientists who experimented on him until he learned to assume other shapes. During this time, Bajor was under occupation by the Cardassians, whose society is formed around admiration for and obedience to the state.
And there's more to life than duty to the state.
A Federation viewpoint, if ever I heard one.
Odo eventually left the laboratory and was hired to be chief of security on the space station Terok Nor. When the Bajoran resistance drove the Cardassians from Bajor, Odo remained as chief of security, somehow, keeping his post under Federation administration of the base, now called Deep Space Nine. Odo learned that his people, the Changelings, controlled a vast interplanetary empire called the Dominion. Eventually, the Dominion tried, unsuccessfully, to conquer the Federation, the Klingon Empire, and the rest of the Alpha Quadrant of the galaxy. Once the war was over, Odo resolved to rejoin his people. So, that's his backstory. That is everything someone needs to know who has not seen Deep Space Nine. Now, here is where things get complicated. In order to preserve Odo as a sympathetic character to the audience of the series, his time serving the Cardassians is often whitewashed. In the Season 5 episode, Things Past, following a conference about the former occupation, Odo is revealed to be very popular among the Bajorans.
What was it the moderator said? That you may have worked for the Cardassians, but your only master was justice.
But is that true? Collaborationism is the term used to describe active cooperation with the enemy against the interests of the people, particularly during times of war or when the people are under occupation by an invading enemy. This is commonly used to describe those who cooperated and appeased fascist occupations during World War II. Whether or not Odo himself is Bajoran is irrelevant. He is a Bajoran citizen, or at least a permanent resident. Odo was chief of security of Terok Nor. He was hired by Gul Dukat, the Cardassian prefect of Bajor, who was responsible for the death and enslavement of countless Bajorans. Dukat was Odo's superior officer, which means Odo followed Dukat's orders. During the aforementioned episode Things Past, we see that Odo was responsible for falsely arresting 3 Bajorans with circumstantial evidence. These 3 Bajorans were executed. Odo himself was present during the execution. When Odo's secret is revealed at the end of the episode, Major Kira Nerys, a Bajoran officer and former member of the Bajoran resistance movement, asks Odo if he had ever been responsible for any other wrongful arrests, wrongful convictions, unjust treatment, or unjust executions. Odo responds only that he doesn't really know. He claims that he hopes not. The question lingered in the air. How many more Bajorans were not treated justly following Odo's investigations and arrests? Well, let's look at the Cardassian justice system. In the Season 2 episode Tribunal, this system is explored. Chief Miles O'Brien is arrested under erroneous charges, and he is found guilty before the trial has begun. This is actually standard operating procedure. In the Cardassian justice system, the trial itself is only a spectacle for the Cardassian people. It is meant to inspire confidence in the state and to keep the civilian population under their thumb. Nobody is ever found innocent. Every trial is a mock trial, but results in genuine consequences, often execution. O'Brien is only released when the Cardassians' plot is discovered, and the charges are dropped only to spare themselves embarrassment. Alleged criminals are stripped of their clothes before trial, then processed by removing teeth and other identifying samples. With these things in mind, though Odo claims ignorance, it could be argued that the true answer to the question, how many more Bajorans were not treated justly following Odo's investigations and arrests, is actually all of them. Every last one. In addition to the Cardassian justice system only engaging in a mockery of due process, Bajorans arrested during the occupation were almost certainly not treated as well as Cardassians on average. This means that Bajorans arrested on non-capital offenses would nonetheless receive capital punishment. Odo is undoubtedly responsible for the execution of many other Bajorans who committed non-capital offenses. The idea that Odo was simply a neutral party is deeply ignorant about the power dynamics of an occupying force versus an enslaved people. Odo's protestations of being unbiased are irrelevant because he was still working for Gul Dukat. Odo was not a mediator between the Bajoran people and the Cardassian people, doling out justice as a neutral third party. He got his information from Dukat and from the Cardassian military, which means Odo investigated only what he was allowed to investigate. Terak Nor was a military installation. That means practically every Cardassian living on the station was in the military, not a civilian. The only Cardassians Odo could have potentially arrested were Cardassian officers, and it is simply absurd to think that the Cardassian officers were subject to the same consequences as Bajoran slaves if the Cardassian prefect was overseeing all the operations. Dukat himself was undoubtedly guilty of many crimes, but he was certainly never arrested by Odo. A police officer works for the state. A police officer is not a neutral third party that settles disputes between the state and the civilian population. Odo was told that being chief of security would help maintain order on Terak Nor, but the state does not maintain a neutral order. It maintains a particular kind of order, favoring a particular kind of people, and sustaining a particular power dynamic. It is not possible to be a neutral actor within an oppressive system. As Desmond Tutu once said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Odo adhered to the law, but the law set up by the state had Bajorans in slavery. In addition to this, and what is most damning, is that Odo must have arrested other members of the Bajoran resistance whose only crimes were fighting for the freedom of their people under a terrible and costly occupation. In Things Past and other episodes, we see that the Bajoran resistance was active on Terak Nor, and if Odo was chief of security, then Odo was the one investigating the resistance, making the arrests, and sending them to be processed by the Cardassian justice system, ultimately to be executed. That means that if a Bajoran tried to escape, capturing that Bajoran slave would have fallen under the authority of the chief of security, Odo. If a Bajoran tried to fight back, that Bajoran would have been arrested under the authority of the chief of security, Odo. The Bajoran resistance was obviously illegal, which meant any resistance activities on Terak Nor were thwarted by Odo. The fact that Odo does not arrest Kira does not change what his job must have been for years serving as chief of security of Terak Nor. In the Season 7 episode, When It Rains, Odo's collaboration was finally brought up by a Cardassian.
Odo wasn't a collaborator.
I suppose that depends on your definition of collaborator.
Odo claims that he eventually came to understand that the Cardassians had little interest in justice. He says he only learned this too late. However, in a flashback of Odo first being recruited by Gul Dukat to be chief of security of Terak Nor, it is clear that Odo already knows what will happen to the people he arrests, guilty or innocent.
I'm talking about order here, justice. There's very little justice in the Cardassian occupation of Bajor.
Furthermore, it is clear by some of his statements after the occupation that he prefers some aspects of Cardassian justice more than the Federation system of justice.
You know, Cardassian rule may have been oppressive, but at least it was simple.
Say what you like. It was safer then.
Unless you happen to be a Bajoran.
Odo's defenders might claim that had he not taken the position of chief of security, whoever the Cardassians chose instead may have been worse. But that is the same rationalization that Gul Dukat uses throughout the series to justify millions of Bajoran deaths and enslavement. That another Cardassian would have been worse.
I protected them in so many ways. Cared for them as if they were my own children.
You are responsible for the murder of over 5 million Bajorans on your watch. True or false?
False! I tried to save lives during my administration. If it hadn't been for me, the occupation would have been much worse.
And you want to thank you?
In addition to this being a hypothetical and an equivocation, it ignores the fact that if Odo or Dukat actually opposed the occupation on moral grounds, they could have chosen to actively resist or resign their posts. It ignores the option of active resistance, and only gives the option of working with the state. If the argument, "it could have been worse," does not hold up for Dukat, it does not hold up for Odo just because we like him more. Odo was a collaborator during the occupation, and the series' insistence that he wasn't doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. He may have been conflicted about it, and he may have regretted it, but his personal feelings both during and after the occupation are not particularly helpful to those he arrested and had executed. So, why did Odo feel comfortable enough to do this? Let's put a pin in that and look at Odo as a cop. After the occupation, Odo continued as Chief of Security under the newly renamed Deep Space Nine, now a Bajoran station under Federation administration. Odo spends much of his time as Chief of Security violating the civil rights of the residents of the space station.
I decide who has rights and who doesn't on this promenade.
You better ask your Federation superiors about that one.
For example, in the episode Past Prologue, he argues in favor of locking up 2 women as a precautionary measure because they were seen in Quark's bar. Even though Quark is at worst suspected of being a petty thief and smuggler of harmless wares, Odo still feels it necessary to violate his civil rights whenever possible. Odo even illegally wiretaps his establishment.
Is that legal?
It's in the best interest of station security.
And who decides what is in the best interest of station security? Odo alone, who believes by his own admission that he decides who has rights on the promenade. In fact, Odo consistently demands that Captain Sisko bypass civil rights and local laws to allow himself to establish Deep Space Nine as a police state.
If I was given the authority I asked for, instead of being tied to Starfleet regulations, there wouldn't have been any security breaches.
Odo becomes furious when a Starfleet officer is assigned to work with him, because it would mean he wouldn't be able to decide who has rights. This is not to say Odo's past collaboration with the Cardassians and the manner in which he conducts himself as a police officer makes him a fascist, but Quark certainly seems to think so.
Fascist! Failure! Failure!
In the episode Bar Association, Quark's employees form a union under the leadership of Rom, Quark's brother. Chief O'Brien, Dr. Julian Bashir, and other members of the senior staff support unionization and the picket line. Odo is the only senior staff character who is ideologically opposed to the union, or mob as he calls it, and sides with the capitalist. In this case, Quark.
From what Chief O'Brien tells me about strikes, they sound like trouble. I don't like mobs. In my opinion, if you need one to get what you want, it's not worth getting.
That makes no sense. If people are desperate enough to strike, then what they want must be very important to them and worth getting. This scene illustrates how the state and the police specifically side with capital over the interests of the people. Even Odo, who deeply dislikes Quark, instinctively sides with him to maintain that aforementioned specific form of order. An order that is not neutral and often favors the powerful over the powerless.
Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains.
Odo frequently confuses order with justice, something pointed out to him by the female changeling. Odo's people, according to her, have an inherent need for order. Because of this, Odo's priorities always favor this order, even if this order has an absence of justice. Speaking of the changelings, at the end of the 5th season and the beginning of the 6th season, the Dominion occupied Bajoran space, including DS9. Major Kira began a resistance movement that included Jake Sisko, Rom, and eventually even Quark. Odo, on the other hand, took a role on the council that governed the station, collaborating with the Dominion, once again justifying it as being better than the alternative instead of actively resisting, because resistance would cause disorder. When Kira sows division between the Jem'Hadar soldiers and the Cardassian soldiers, Odo is furious, and Kira is rightfully offended.
It's as if you're so invested in making sure the station runs smoothly, you've forgotten there's a war going on.
Odo reluctantly agrees to help Kira with the resistance, but at the key moment when he was meant to turn off the security systems, Odo was instead linking with another changeling. This resulted in Rom being arrested and sentenced to be executed. He was only freed due to the heroic actions of Quark of all people. Odo's defenders might say that he was being manipulated by the female changeling, which is both true and misleading. Yes, the female changeling did use the link to sway Odo to her side, but he still chose to side with her of his own free will. Odo was not possessed by a wraith or something. It's Odo just really loving being all gooey with another changeling. It's not mind control, it just feels good and natural to him. And it can't just be swept under the rug by saying he was overwhelmed by how it felt. Anyway, Odo sides with the Dominion for a while before switching sides again to help Kira. This somehow absolves Odo of everything he did, even though, in truth, he should have been arrested and stripped of his rank after the Federation regained control of the station. Odo's defenders might say that this isn't even light treason because the Dominion occupation of Bajor was technically legal. After all, Bajor signed a treaty with the Dominion immediately before they arrived, effectively surrendering. However, a treaty signed under duress and under threat is not signed in good faith. When fascists occupied France after the latter surrendered during World War II, that did not change the fact that France was threatened with war. It was not a peaceful coexistence, it was a military occupation, and one that was actively resisted by the people. Furthermore, the fact that Odo may have felt that he was serving the so-called legitimate government only bolsters the point that Odo cares more about order and maintaining the status quo than disrupting it. Odo serves the order of whoever happens to control the space station, the Cardassian Union during the occupation, the Bajoran Provisional Government after the occupation, and the Dominion during part of the war. He might not see it that way, but that is still what happened. Odo's defenders might also say that he eventually made the moral choice and sided against the Dominion, but in later episodes it became clear that Odo sided with Bajor not out of moral obligation, but because he was in love with Kira. Now, Odo's defenders may claim his intentions are debatable, but the Season 7 episode Chimera leaves no ambiguity. A changeling, Laz, effectively reads Odo's mind while linked, and states in no uncertain terms that the only reason Odo is not out there fighting alongside the Dominion is because of his relationship with Kira.
Odo, we linked. I know the truth. You stayed here because of Kira. If it weren't for her, you would be with our people. War or no war, you would be a founder.
Odo's allegiance after he learns about his people is predominantly the result of his feelings for Kira, first suggested in the episode Heart of Stone, and later confirmed without a shadow of a doubt in Chimera. At the end of the series, Odo's desire to join his people in the Dominion finally comes true, as he offers to come home in exchange for the surrender of the female changeling. This is not some great sacrifice, it is literally what Odo has wanted since the beginning of the series. Odo not knowing who his people are and his desire to seek them out is his main character thread throughout seasons 1 and 2. Odo continued to want to join his people even after learning they were basically shapeshifter supremacists and galactic imperialists. Odo even wanted to join his people while their representative committed genocide against billions of Cardassians. Odo rationalizes all of this by claiming that maybe he could change the Dominion, but history has shown that when Odo is linked, it is he who is manipulated. What's different this time? Because he's wearing a tuxedo? He just wants to rationalize joining the Great Link to Kira. As a side note, the Federation is extremely bad at treaties. First, their treaty with the Cardassians leaves some of their Federation citizens so vulnerable that it effectively kicks off another war in the demilitarized zone between the Cardassians and the Maquis, and now the unconditional surrender of the Dominion results in the Federation having only one prisoner of war and seemingly no other major concessions. The entire Great Link, all of the founders, were presumably in favor of the war and helped carry it out, but nobody else in the Link will stand trial for war crimes? What? As far as we can tell, the Dominion gave up no territory in the Gamma Quadrant, only in the Alpha Quadrant. The territory that was not theirs to begin with. What is preventing them from rebuilding their military on their home turf and trying again? Tuxedo Odo? He has consistently proven that he cannot be trusted. Good riddance, Odo. Get back in your goo. In conclusion, the Dominion is a land of contrasts. Now, okay, Odo is a cop. He prefers order over actual justice, and his allegiance changes as suddenly and as easily as his body does. Oh yeah, and he makes passionate love to the female changeling while his friends are in prison, and that's just gross.